Well, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar with Dr. Erin Reineke. And Erin, thank you so much for coming on to speak with us today. This month's webinar is titled Mastering Marketability, How to Approach Landing Your Dream Job. So as a really quick introduction, Erin is a trained scientist with a varied background in academia and pharmaceutical industry. She recently started as an associate director of global scientific communications in rare blood disorders at Sanofi. This was a transition from Sanofi General Medicines, where she was a member of the US cardiovascular MSL team for the last 3 years. This time, most recently, included an interim position as Global Cardiovascular Scientific Communications Lead. Prior to joining the Sanofi team, Erin was an MSL for Syneos, supporting the GSK adult vaccine team, which was the start of her time in the pharma industry. As for the academic side, Erin gained her doctoral degree in biochemistry at Case Western University in Cleveland, Ohio, followed by a postdoctoral research period at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. She competed for and was awarded an NIH grant to help transition to an independent role and successfully ran her own research group for 5 years at Houston Methodist Research Interest. Her research background is generally molecular mechanisms of biology with early roots in oncology, but later specializing in cardiac stress, metabolism, and angiogenesis, with a focus on cell-to-cell communication between different cell types in these environments. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Erin to get us started by telling us a little bit about her background, experiences, and how you knew that the medical affairs and MSL career path was right for you. Oh, right. Also, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Really quick, I just wanted to say, if the participants do have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat box and we can get to it towards the end of the talk. All right, thank you so much, Erin. Go ahead.
So yeah, it's a small group. So if you have questions going on, I don't mind if there's a jump in, something's relevant. So obviously you hear the basics of my background, but pretty much when we hit the point at which I was a PI running the lab, there was, not so different than now, but there's a lot of pressure on young scientists to follow a certain path and do things a certain way, a lot of pressure on strict funding. And this was causing a lot of negativity between scientists. It was not like, let's work together. It was, okay, well, I'm just gonna, I'll be mean to you because I just got bad news, more type of thing, which does not match with my personality well. On top of that, we were watching a lot of professors that had labs for 40 years, 30 years, like, oh, I'm on my last $7,000. Oh, and it was a lot to watch and a lot of stress. And then my husband's also a scientist, and we kind of decided maybe long-term, and this feeds to what we were just talking about before, which is the stability. Maybe we shouldn't both be doing this long-term. And it was a kind of a discussion. We had young kids. If one of us can find something else where we think we could be happy, let's go ahead and do that. And part of the problem was, we were never doing the move, the critical move. I'm done with this part and I need to move to really better my career at the same time point. And it was hurting us in the long run. So I spent about 6 months looking through what can I do with my PhD. I know you all know that fun game. And basically this speaks to what I wanted to, really discuss today, which is break things down into skills, break things down into what do I enjoy doing? What am I good at doing? What do I want to be doing? And the answers are not always the same thing. For me, I found that I really enjoyed talking about the science, my own science. I liked talking about, helping out other people with science. I loved the training and mentoring, especially with, the summer students. I had done some teaching at Baylor, and I really enjoyed when I could make an impact for somebody else, something I said, helped them to achieve their goal. And I realized it was less specifically maybe my own research. Being, you have to prioritize when you're looking at these things. And so career-wise, MSL is a nice fit there. It is a lot of science communicating. It is choosing words to meet a specific audience, because it's not always an expert audience. it's not always a KOL that knows what's going on. It's sometimes a KOL that knows more than you do. And you learn how to, work within those to deliver a message. And it also gave us a little bit of freedom. If my husband ever needed to move, I knew I could get an MSL anywhere. I would probably have to, quit and get a new MSL, but I could get a job somewhere if we needed to move. And then the third part was, it kept the flexibility that I had. Academic gives you a lot of autonomous flexibility. Like, yes, you spend a lot of time in, but you need to be out, you work it out on your own. And the MSL career still kept that for me, which was important with the kids. Like, if we had to be out, one of us had to have a way to be able to handle that. So that's kind of what led into that. Then there was a lot of searching. I did what you're doing, connect with a lot of MSLs. I talked to 20 or 30 probably on the phone that I randomly linked in. Networking is everything in landing a job in MSL life. You can see, I don't know how much you caught on that intro, but my scientific background and my first MSL do not overlap at all. So I was a vaccines MSL. This was because somebody I randomly talked to on LinkedIn who had been an MSL for a while, had a similar background to mine, said, hey, if you apply at Syneos ever, let me know. Still know a lot of people there. And so I did. It turns out she was the ex-boss of the hiring manager for the position, got my resume to the hiring manager. I mean, after that point, it's all on you. But that's like, they're getting, 200 applications now. AI feeds out a ton at especially big companies. Like, getting your stuff specifically looked at very quickly in the process, because I can't confirm this, but I swear HR will look through until they have, these are my top however many required applicants. And if those meet, then we don't go through the rest. Like, it's not necessarily finding the best of their stack of 200. It's finding somebody in the stack that can meet the profile. And so getting your stuff looked at is critical. So I got that job. It worked great. And then COVID hit. So I don't know how much you all remember about the start of COVID, but with all the uncertainty, people are like, pharma is going to take a huge hit, was the prediction. And I was working contract, which, pharma companies start cutting, they're going to cut contracts first. And so I started looking for positions direct with the company. The cardiovascular was open with Sanofi in Houston. And then that was a very different MSL, probably a discussion for a different time. But it was a good fit for me for several reasons. And then I was there for 3 years, got the opportunity to expand. Communications is a mix of, publication, management, which obviously with my background was very easy to step into, but then also all of the extra resources that come out. You learn how to make and integrate. So like webinars, podcasts, symposia at congresses. And so it was a nice, segue, and I really enjoyed that. I'm looking for something, different at this point. So that is the new role that I'm still onboarding for. So you'll have to check back in later if you want to know if I.
Well, that is very cool. So like, since you mentioned you were a PI, and like, well, obviously from your background, you are like a person who have more like academic intense background, like before you start like medical affairs. And for you, like, what are like the unique skill that PhD or people that like people with like academic intense background that could be an advantage, but also like a requirement for an MSL for like when they do a job search or like applying for a job?
Yes. So one, in general, my advice is, regardless of your background, find someone to talk to that has gotten into the role that has the same background. Because there is, exactly as you said, a set of skills that you probably haven't thought that specifically about yourself that you're bringing to the table. Now, academic wise, you have been taught to what? You've been taught to very strategically think. You are a very independent worker. You plan things from start to finish, and in general are probably pretty organized in your work. You are good at time management. If you aren't, you probably aren't that successful in the lab, let's be honest. So it's these types of like skills that translate to MSL work. Like I think about MSL at its base. You have to be able to work from home. You have to manage your territory, which means you have a certain amount of time and a certain number of KOLs. You have objectives that you're getting from the company you need to meet. It's not just numbers. It's, I need to get information from these people. I need to plan what resources match which of these KOLs, and I need to plan this conversation so that hopefully I'm getting the information I need to take back to the company. So there is a lot of strategic planning and thinking and autonomy. And at the end of the day, your boss just wants it done. They don't really care how you do it. You can be out in the field every day. You can be out in the field one day if you're turning it in and you're doing the job that you were needed to do. And then you also learn to take on, in the lab, you're good at multitasking usually, or finding a way to, run simultaneous different projects, which won't be an MSL starting, but once you hit a senior level, or depending on the team structure, you're going to take on additional jobs, and you need to be able to, focus on those as needed without hurting your field work. So I like, MSLs all the time will reach out on LinkedIn, and almost always, if it's a PhD, I'll talk to them because it's different. PharmDs have a very different training. They have a very different skill set, usually by nature also, but they've been trained to do. They will look at a picture differently. They know the drugs. I don't speak in drugs very well. I'm always like, what does it do? How do we spell that again? So, I mean, I know I have a different thing. They think about drug mechanisms. They think about, usually clinical interactions a little better. I know that those are the parts I have to work on. And when I sit down at a new role, and I just had to learn a whole new therapeutic area. I literally started with Google. I'm like, okay, what is ITP? But you know that you can learn that very well, because that's what you're trained to do. Every time you move in academia to something new, you're reading through the literature, you're upskilling on the information. You will get there. You just have to give yourself patience and time to get there. And so for PhDs, it's recognizing, because what people see is, like when you say, lab scientists, if you don't explain those skills, like every time I wrote a grant, I was getting people to invest their time and money into my ideas. Every time I asked for a collaboration, I had to get somebody else to spend their time not on their stuff, on my stuff, or I had to get their ideas and be of interest enough to them. It is the same set of skills, but you have to spell it out, because they see somebody that stood and squirted stuff on a lab table, and those skills, while they're great in the kitchen, don't necessarily translate to an MSL. And pharmacists have their own set, MDs have their own set of ways to, talking things they're trained to do. So you really have to sit and think about, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis, in very general terms, and be able to explain that to someone else.
That was really great. Along those same lines, is there anything that you would maybe, so as coming in as a PhD, are there skills that you think that we typically lack, and ways to show that we can maybe, do some of those tasks that we don't necessarily have experience in?
Yep, that's a great question. I would say clinical knowledge is generally the part that's most lacking. And I'm not saying it in that we don't know what's going on medically. I'm saying like you're up against a lot of PharmDs, a few MDs. These are people that think body-wide and integrate systems, and what is that drug doing across, and what are the interactions. We're taught to focus and look at, in general, a much smaller area, and what is like this small part doing on this. And it's not a holistic clinical picture of a patient. And so that's something that is very useful to the team because most people don't have that, bottom up approach. But also you need to think about the other side a little more because that's an important part of the conversations that you're having with doctors. The other part is if you're not trained in clinical trials, that would be a good thing to get some knowledge on. And it doesn't have to be experience per se, but you need to understand the landscape. Johns Hopkins has some, I think Johns Hopkins and Khan Academy, so Coursera and Khan Academy have some good free programs just on like clinical trial basics, drug discovery and design, like understand what you're getting in. The other part that I still struggle with is understanding the payer and insurance and hospital landscape and structure. I still have very little knowledge of how exactly, and I have more than I did starting, but people, PharmDs work in this system every day and they understand, oh, well, it goes to this person. This is who you're looking for. And I was like, I don't know. I like literally don't know what you're saying to me right now. So you have to be willing to spend some time and talk to someone about that. I'm not sure you need it going in, but you definitely need to understand it to work in pharma. So don't be afraid to ask questions when you don't know stuff too.
I have a question. Thanks, Erin. The question is, I am new, I have been doing my postdoc here and I have been going through interview, and most of the times they are saying that everything is great, your communication, your profile, but you don't have industry experience. So that's their biggest concern. How to tackle that? Always.
It is a lot of luck. I hate to say that because it sounds discouraging, but that's the truth. When I say luck, like, as I said, like I got the final job I got because I had randomly talked to someone that knew someone. It wasn't necessarily that it was any different than me sending in my application anywhere else, but you needed that little extra something because they don't know you and you're not, and you could be up against somebody else that, the hiring manager has a reference for. You could be up against someone internal that somebody else is already talking to, and they have to interview so many people. All of these places, we all know how HR works. So there are places that are a little more new person friendly than others. Working contract is one of them. So TMAC, Syneos, to a lesser extent, Ashfield. Ashfield is contract, but they tend to want a little more experience. And then there are some companies that are more friendly to, MSLs that don't have experience. Sanofi happens to be one of them. AbbVie is another one that hires a lot of people without experience and are willing to train. The other thing is small pharma sometimes, and it really depends on the hiring manager. If it's someone that wants to take the time to train someone so they can do it their way, then you will get a good fit. If it's somebody that wants somebody that, can come in and just start going and get stuff out, then they're going to go with someone with more experience. And that doesn't reflect on you. It just reflects on their situation, what they have time for, what they want. I interviewed before I got the Sanofi one. I interviewed for an oncology position in Houston. I made 3 rounds. I talked to the hiring manager after because I didn't get the job. What can I do? Always follow up. What could I do better? What can I improve on? What wasn't clear? She said, you interviewed great, but you were up against someone who had 8 years of MSL experience, and MD Anderson is a huge market for them. They couldn't take the chance on somebody that didn't have specific experience there. And it makes sense. And it wasn't anything I did. So it just takes time and a match. It's always dependent on who you're up against too.
That is very great. So for us, it's like one of those things that we kind of sometimes, it's hard for us to just market ourselves, during the job applications process, and sometimes we feel like a little bit more like step out of, market yourself sounds like you stepping out of your comfort zone. So do you have a good piece of advice or strategy, like how to best market yourself, like for building network, for your like writing your resume, or during for your interviews?
Yes, that is something that, even now, you have to put yourself, it's something that's hard for me. And it's not something I do regularly, but when you're interviewing, you have to, step out of that comfort zone and realize, like, I am interviewing now, like, I need to tell them what I'm good at. But part of that is us realizing what we're good at also. And this is part self-reflection. Like, we all know what we think we're good at, and we all know what we struggle with. The other part is finding how you are perceived by others, and those don't always match. So, I mean, if you have good friends and you can ask and you're not going to feel uncomfortable about it, ask them. Like, what are some things you think I do well? What are some things I could improve on? It doesn't have to be like an awkward conversation, but I realize, some people aren't comfortable with that. Either the easier way to think about it is, what do I often go to people for? So these are things that, don't come as naturally to me. Or what do I compliment people on the most? Because it is something you're recognizing in someone else that they're doing well, that you may or not often do as well as them. So it's an area where you can improve. The other is, what do people compliment me on a lot? So what do teammates come to me for? What am I often asked for? What type of information? What type of resource? So are they asking you strategic questions? Are they asking you, how do I phrase this when I talk to someone? Are they saying you are very good at explaining something? Have a list of those things. And then in your interview, that's what you want to, sell, highlight, these are the areas that I am good at. And when you pick it's all, examples, right? Tell me about a time when, pick examples that match your strengths. So you can say, I was really good at this without, specifically saying it. If you want, if you've got the confidence to do that, go for it. But if you don't, you can highlight yourself that way. This is a set of strengths I have. And people ask all the time, what do I answer? What are my weaknesses? It is awkward for everyone every time, but they're asking for a couple of reasons. One, they want to know, are you going to struggle with the job? Two, they want to know, do you have some amount of self-realization? Like, are you aware of your own strengths and weaknesses? Or are you being real with them in the interview? MSL work is all about communication. If you come to that interview and you're not being your honest, true, real self, it's going to come clear, and it's going to be very clear when you answer that question. And I often say, think about rephrasing your answer so that it's not like, I'm bad at these things. These are the things I'm working on. These are the things I know I reach out to other people for. And so this is how I'm addressing it. This is how I'm trying to get better at it. Show that you are a work in progress. You are aware of that. You are trying to get better at those things. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. They're not asking you to, say, I'm terrible at time management. I would not suggest doing that. I'm saying identify and be, real with them about areas that you're improving and learning on. Now there's endless podcasts and books and resources. LinkedIn is an endless source of, things. I think one of the questions that was in was about emotional intelligence. One of the questions sent in, and can we get better at it? We can most definitely get better at it. But you're not going to find it in academic literature. You're going to find it in LinkedIn in academic literature. These are the things talked about in Harvard Business Review. These are the things that you're going to, because those are the arenas where it's discussed and highlighted. So you might have to go seeking for it, but it is entirely relevant to you. And so just expand your answers to show that you're aware and building on yourself.
go. So Dr. Reineke, I think I'm going to be giving you a phone call actually tomorrow, so I don't want to take up too much time from today. But so I just got an email the other day for Sanofi that I'm doing a presentation with them. And so as part of the interview process. And so for a lot of us, like I had to quickly Google like, oh, MSL presentations, how is it different, what to do? So if you're in your experience, what is that presentation part where they ask you to present some of your work? If you're not a clinical scientist, maybe you're preclinical or basic scientist, and you present your work to them, how do you try to make it tangible to something that's field medical?
Yeah, that is a great question. First, congrats on the interview. So the presentation comes in all different forms. So sometimes they send you a paper. Sometimes they ask you to talk about something on an area. Sometimes it is entirely open-ended. Sometimes they ask you to talk about your work. That's probably the hardest one, especially coming from academia. Like it would be easier to choose anything than it would be to be, bucketed into, I have to talk about my work and it is very basic science because they want to hear clinical. That's all we're ever talking. So best case scenario there, I would suggest, and realize your audience does not by and large talk mechanism or proteins or processes. They don't do cell signaling. They might know it a little bit from the mechanism of their drug, but they don't want to see a ton of graphs. They're used to looking at Kaplan-Meier curves and bar graphs of clinical groups. Like think about what you see in papers from clinical literature. So I would do a very small part on your research, which is going to like gut you. And I'm sorry to say that, like, you're gonna be like, this is years of my research in 1 minute and one slide. And then I would say, these are the things going on clinically. This is relevant to the clinical landscape, and pull some information from, find a relevant clinical trial that's going on or that was recently published, or put together a couple, which is not nearly as fun for you, I realize. And I would show that you can talk about clinical trials. If it was me, that's would be my advice. Now, you can probably talk to every MSL and their advice is going to be slightly different there. I was given the advice, early on, actually from one of the hiring managers after, because I had to do that. And she said, cut even more of the basic science. If you can, only talk clinical. But you were asked to do a specific thing, and I think you need to deliver on that. Like, this is all I've been doing, but this is where we're going. This is why it's relevant, and just focus there. They're looking for your ability to walk through a presentation, to deliver a message. They love it when you've got some follow-up directions because you didn't you're critically thinking about it. These are things we do all the time, but these are not things that, say, a PharmD that hasn't been giving presentations to the lab every week for all of the past 10 years is coming in doing. This is where you can shine because you can show, but also realize you can't go fast through it. Your audience isn't used to looking at that data. And so you need to take the time, be like, on this page, we have a graph of this, and on the x-axis, we have this, and you can see the placebo is in gray and our drug treatment is in green. And over time, take the time to walk through the slide. Pretend like you're, okay, I'm going to say this, but I don't mean it. Okay, pretend like you're presenting to your parents. I was going to say a high school audience, but that would mean they were not an intelligent audience, which is not what I meant. But yeah, think about it as that level of description and take the time, because what you're used to presenting, you aren't going to spend the time. You're going to put up a Western blot and be like, so you can see that the levels changed when we hit with drug, and then you're going to move on, and that's not going to cut it. They want to see that you can keep your audience with you, deliver a very clear message, go with less content, more time spent describing it, high points.
So that does bring up one follow-up question that might be relatable to like I know Melody also, she's in here. She works on a drug like midazolam, like approved drug. I've worked on approved drugs that aren't with Sanofi. Is it taboo at all to bring in clinical data from non-Sanofi drugs?
No, do whatever. Also be ready for the curveball. One interview process. So they had said, 15-minute presentation, 5 minutes for questions. We get there and she's like, okay, so pretend I'm the KOL and you're in the office. And I was like, okay. And she's like, so I realized that we had 15 minutes for a presentation today, but now I have to leave in about 7 minutes. Could you, and it was like in the interview on the spot, can I present with the slides I already have, because there's no changing it, the same message in 7 minutes? So just and it's actually something PhDs do very well, because we know our presentation, we know our slides, we know how long they have to take, we know where the high points are. So you just got to take a minute, like take the breath. It's okay to be like, okay, give me a second, think through it. And then you just go and you're like, for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this part. And, yeah, kind of anything goes when you hit there. I've had ones where they literally didn't pay attention to a word I was saying, I'm pretty sure. I've heard from people, I haven't had it, but I've heard from people where people were like trying to rile you up by the questions during it, very like upfront. I'm like, oh, we're PhDs. Like, you're going to have to do better than that. Like, I've had a bad audience before. It's okay. But just thank you for your question. If you don't know, always, if you don't know, don't answer it. I will look that up and follow up. I am not entirely sure. I will get back to you. If you aren't sure, don't answer it. They are looking for this over and over and over. They will purposefully try to find someone just to find something just to make sure that that's going to be your answer. So, and then do the follow-up, because, whether or not you get it, why not?
That's a great answer. Thank you very much.
Those are some really good points. I had never thought of, keeping the science short and jumping into kind of what's out there right now. That's really, really smart. I like that a lot. And so just in terms of this whole keeping with the concept of marketability and like marketing ourselves through this application process and getting hired process, what do you think are key important things in terms of marketing ourselves once we're in this MSL position to get some of these KOL connections and things like that? Like how, as a PhD, are you making those connections and how are you marketing yourself at that point?
It is hard. I would say response rate to emails, like introduction emails, is maybe like 5%. It is tough. Now, if you have an exciting drug, I did not have an exciting drug for the past. It was remarketed, so it was like 12 years old. So you had to really find the people that, wanted to talk to you. But there will be people reaching out. There are often lists, but you've got to bring something to the table for higher success. So that might be, I saw your recent paper. I had a question about this. Can we connect and talk about it? Then within it, you're going to say, oh, well, I'm an MSL. This is what we talk about. Would you be interested in communicating further? I saw your recent tweet. Actually, there's a girl on my other team that was fantastic on social media, and she would always say, like, she'd wait and try and catch it and like send them an email within like an hour of seeing the tweet, because she knows they're not in the clinic right then, so you're more likely to get a response. Try to find something personal. Oh, I saw on your LinkedIn page that you're interested in this. Can we talk about that? It doesn't have to be relevant to your goal that first meeting. It's getting them to talk to you, to know you. And then, as we said, be real, be honest, be your authentic self, smile, make it an enjoyable conversation for them. If you ask them for 5 minutes, keep it at 5 minutes, be respectful of their time. These are all things for like starting to build those relationships. You'll find that MSL teams do a lot of training on like reading people and personalities and learning styles and work styles and all over the board. But one of the trainings our other team did was on recognizing communication styles based on like how a person dressed, how they talked, what was on their background, whether they were neat, whether they were, art pictures, or whether they were, degrees. And it's, does this person like to have time to sit and look at the information themselves and ask you questions? Is this someone that wants the message in 2 minutes, get out the door, send them details they can look at later if they're interested? Is this someone who wants you asking about their input and how do they feel about their colleagues' comments, and can you compare and in your expert opinion? So there's very, is it someone that is a more like that needs the personal connection more? So you're going to start off asking about, do you have any plans for the summer? You're eventually going to get to your science, and you're going to finish off asking about, their family and have a nice day. And they want that personal connection. That to them is more important than, so there's a whole bunch of tools in there that you learn to recognize. You yourself have to be able to adapt. And so one of the things interviewing that is great is showing, like, if you can, in those questions, look, I regularly deal with people of very different personalities on my team. We work together, I can adapt, and we can get stuff done. And everybody has their own strengths and weaknesses. You learn to extract those. You learn to work with people different ways. Like if you think in your head, you're like, you have a certain experiment that needs done, who you're going to in your lab to do it. You're not going to the person that works on mice to go get, their Western blot done, unless they happen to be the same person. But the same idea on your team, and just show like they don't realize as much in academia how negative and direct, we'll go with direct, people can be in their conversation, and how unadaptable some people can be to working with others. And so that is a great thing to highlight, because you're going to run into physicians that are having a bad day. You're going to run into a physician that's maybe not happy. And if you can highlight, you can work with that person, and you can still deliver and build a relationship with them, and it's not going to like bug you. That's great. That is a step forward. That is a plus in your category.
I was gonna really quick add to that. Are there tips to, finding jobs within your own current location, versus how do you market yourself for that versus like, a different territory if you want, a therapeutic area that's not available in your area, for example?
I mean, it's just what you want to look for and apply for. I would say apply for anything that is relevant to you, and highlight somewhere in your resume or job application, willing to move, moving to this area if it's not your territory. Use that cover letter they don't always ask for it. It's not explicit, but you can always turn it in as the first page of your resume. Nobody's saying you can't do it. And that's a great place to do that. That's a great place to highlight, I want to work for Sanofi because of their commitment to whatever you pull off from their motto, or what you know about them, or something you've seen, like they've been involved with this lately, or the therapeutic area is one that I'm personally connected to, and so I have a great interest in doing this. Like, that's great. They know you're going to bring your passion, so use that area, and then it's all in what you're applying for. And I realize you might be applying for everything, but you can have a reason for applying for everything that you only state for each of the individual things.
And since we're on cover letters, can we really quickly also do kind of some really strong do's and maybe some good don'ts for your cover letters?
Sure. So do make it, short and direct. They don't want to read 5 paragraphs and then look at your resume. Do highlight the reasons why the company, what you're saying there is, I want this job this specific role on this team at your company, because that's nowhere that they're going to get from your resume. So it is really a place to highlight, like, you have done your research and you know what you're applying for. You're not just applying for everything, trying to land anything, any type of personal connection, any highlights on what makes you well suited for that specific position. And then you basically, your resume is going to speak for itself on everything else. Just because I know we have a very academic background, like on the team, on the call today, make sure somebody has looked at your resume that is an MSL, because it is a totally different style. And when I say this, I cannot underestimate enough. You'll probably need at least 3 or 4 revisions to take all of the science out of it. Which, once again, I am sorry to gut all of you. It's a little painful when you do it, but even when you think you've done it, have someone look at it again, because you probably need to make things more general, more skill centric. I mean, when I say like my complete list of publications, like here's my highlighted 2, it can be found of, 30 plus at this link. And you're like, that's it. That's all I get in here of, all of my academic time. But if you are serious about landing the role, that's what it's got to be. So, and that's what they're looking for. And it's just, I mean, that's just life. But the cover letter is going to be highlighting, what do I bring to the table? Why do I want specifically this position at this company on this team? It might be that you know someone and they talked about them well, like whatever it is. That's your in to getting them to pay attention to your resume.
This is very great. So so stepping away from like job applications process, like now say if you already start and like get the role, and like when you first starting with the role, then what are the common mistakes that an MSL, a new MSL normally, get into when they start reaching out to their KOL, or like when they first start a role that they commonly not doing right?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably not doing right. It's just not fully understanding kind of where you're going. So one is rushing it. As I said, that first meeting might be 5 minutes, and the whole goal is to get a second meeting. The goal is not necessarily to get an insight that you're turning in, it is literally to make a connection, to get them to recognize your worth, to get another meeting. And then it's going to be, you might have 5 different resources that you can share. Well, if you're only going to have 5 throughout the whole year and you need to meet with this KOL 4 times, if you go to that meeting and are like, oh, I have this, and this, you have now cut yourself off at the knees on what you're going to show in that second meeting. And so you have to like take some time and talk to other MSLs in your team. What are you showing? What are you talking about? How are you framing this? How am I getting the next meeting before I step away from this call? There are lots of things to structure that sometimes you can get nervous and forget about. You don't realize ahead of time, and and you'll be trained on a lot of stuff. Most teams spend a lot of time training, but it's always nerve-wracking. And you got to have answers ready for different things. Not being sure about something often makes people uncomfortable. I would say the biggest mistake I see is people trying to answer things they're not sure about, instead of trying to just be like, I need to double check that and get back to you, because they think it like hurts their credibility. But in honesty, I mean, it's making you more credible of a source as long as you do that follow-up. And so the other big one that I would say most commonly comes up is people either like not understanding, and it's not necessarily something they're doing wrong, but not understanding reactive versus proactive. As an MSL, you're working under medical. You can answer some things proactively, as in I can go to that person with this information. And that is very specifically marked. And that is something that comes to you as an MSL from inside your company. Reactively, I might have 30 resources I can use to answer a question, but if they didn't ask that question, I cannot use it. And so, and there are a lot of gray areas here. It is not like that description makes it sound like it is black and white, and it is not. And like, did they specifically ask for this? And it's learning how to ask like the clarifying question. Well, did you mean this or did you mean this? Is this what you are like? You get that confirmation so that you are comfortable you're answering their question and not answering a different question or sharing information you're not technically allowed to share because it wasn't the right question. So that is where I see a lot of MSLs. That's the biggest like hurdle to get through, and it's learning how to just be comfortable in that space. And I had a lot of people say when we started, it takes honestly a good 2 years for an MSL to really be comfortable fully in the field being an MSL. So don't think it's something that necessarily you have to excel at right away. Nobody's expecting that.
Awesome. KJ has a question in the chat box, and it says, does it look good if we negotiate our salary with our interview team? Is it advisable to do that?
Always. Always negotiate. There is no harm in negotiating. First of all, you're negotiating with HR, who's then, I mean, you're not doing it with the interview team. So they're never going to give you the offer. It's going to go through HR. HR is going to reach out. You are negotiating with HR. So you don't have to feel like weird pressure that you're asking for something, especially coming from academia. Our salaries are already low. They are likely to lowball you. Understand like what other people at other companies have been hired, and know that, you know, there is range. Different companies pay different things. Sanofi is not a super competitive high payer compared to some other companies. But it also depends on what space is the product and the therapeutic area. So, you know, if it's cardiovascular and the company's super interested in immunology, those teams are going to make more money. If they have a brand new drug, they're going to make more money. So you have to understand all of that. MSL Society puts out a yearly report on averages, and look in there and know what your territory, you know, is likely to make. If you're way under that, use it, like use your resource. But they can always say no, and you don't always have to take the second offer. They're not going to retract their offer. At the end of the day, you might be back to what they offered, and you'll have to decide if that's what you're willing to settle on, but it's always worth a try.
Hey,
You are
Jen,
mute,
on mute.
Janani.
You were on mute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. I was going to say, so since we're like capping things off, let's move to the bigger picture a little bit and talk about kind of what success means as an MSL and how you would define success and feel professionally fulfilled.
That is a very, it's a good question. It's a hard question because it goes back to why you're an MSL at its base. Like if you came into an MSL wanting to be, have an impact on patient lives, then you definitely want to find yourself a product that you know is making a big difference in that space, and that you're constantly getting that feedback from the KOLs on how it is impacting their patients, so that you have that, you know, reinforcement. If you're went into an MSL to help communicate about science so that people in general understand what they're doing better, understand the roles, they are making informed decisions, then, you know, just, you know, helping your KOLs, being able to answer those questions, making sure that your territory is covered, you know, then you're going to feel, you know, success, and you're going to feel good in your role. If you came into MSL as an entry position and you were hoping to get some experience, understand how it works, and move up in pharma into a different type of role, you know, learning, you know, understanding, feeling, getting involved with more things internally, taking on extra jobs, then you're going to feel successful, and you're going to feel like you're doing a good job, or, you know, starting to network within your company so you can move up. So I would say that's a lot of, you know, based on what your what your goals are, but as long as, you're keeping in mind, it's nice to keep a list, and reflect on it, put a calendar reminder, reflect on it halfway through the year, reflect on it once a year at the end of the year. What progress have I made towards this? Have I changed it? Am I still on that path? What can I do better towards it? Let's set a few steps and go. I mean, some companies help with this a lot, like Sanofi happens to be one that's huge on IDP and planning. Other ones maybe not so much, and it doesn't mean you have to stick to what you wrote down. Things change too. It's just a time for reflection to make sure that you are feeling successful and working towards whatever that goal was. I think that's more important than necessarily, knowing that you're there. It's making sure that you're doing the activities you need to get that feeling.
That is very nice. I think there's one more time for like a last questions. So one of the audience asking like, is having some business acumen in biotech on top of your PhD considered as a helpful skill for the MSL position?
So I've had team members that had an MBA, and I think it helps with understanding the landscape and where we are, especially when you have competitors coming in. I don't know that, it's probably another way of thinking, and it's probably something that goes into your strategy when you're communicating. I don't know that I've ever necessarily noticed a difference. Nobody's ever asked for it, but I don't think it would be, a set of wasted skills either. And then it might allow you to, a lot of people will move from medical into regulatory or into commercial, or that's gonna give you an extra set of skills when you're trying to make moves like that, for sure. So let me put my email in the chat. I know we're recorded, so I'm not sharing it with everybody at large. But if anybody has further questions or comments, you are more than welcome to reach out anytime. I am happy to answer or connect you with someone that can better answer.
That is awesome. And so to maybe cap off the very last question before we all sign off, is there any one thing in particular you didn't necessarily know about the MSL hiring process or the role that you wish you'd known before jumping into it?
I wish I had known how much it was going to depend on luck.
That's fair.
Well, no, and I say that in that you can get discouraged very quickly, very easily. I went through 3 rounds of making all 3 interviews and lost all of them to people with field experience before I landed a job. And at some point you feel like you're doing something wrong or it's never going to happen for you, but you have to realize, which nobody explicitly stated, like it is not you per se, it is what that hiring manager needs, what that team needs. They are building out a personality. They are looking for a specific skill set. It is who else you're interviewing against. Because we tend to think like, I have to be the best person for the job or the role, but you might not be the best fit for that situation. And so, but that doesn't mean that you aren't good or for your job or something. And so it can be a little discouraging, but you have to keep telling yourself that it will take time and it just has to be that right fit to get in.